She stood beneath the 3 sons of Veralis, draped in threads spun from starlight and subjugation, her hands folded the way her mother taught her before she was taken, before she was told that this was her fate, and that her words were no longer needed, for they had selected for her a union blending of houses and power and blood, but not of hearts. And certainly not of voices, for the Vorlon high brides were not meant to speak. They were vessels, not people, symbols, not souls. And so they trained her to smile without joy and nod without agreement, and she obeyed, not because she wanted to, but because resistance meant exile, and exile meant her clan would suffer, and their fields would rot, and their children would starve. And so she wore the silver veil that sealed her lips and muted her breath, and she walked down the crystal path carved through the court of Tungulus queens, where no bride had spoken in 1,000 years, and waiting at the end was not a prince, nor a warrior, nor a king, but a human. He was not supposed to be there. They had told him he could not enter this realm without titles or tribute, or the favor of the 71 houses. Yet here he was in his worn ceremonial suit, the kind stitched by Earth's last tailor for vows that meant something real, something raw. And his eyes searched hers, not for compliance, but for truth. And though she could not answer, he spoke as though she already had, as though he had heard 1,000 poems pour from her silence. And each step he took was a rebellion, and each word he spoke was an uprising, for the Vorlon court did not permit outsiders to address a bride, especially not in the language of flame that he now used, ancient and nearly forgotten, but still rooted deep in the bones of the galaxy, and it sang through the air like thunder spoken softly. And he said to her, "I know you cannot speak, but I swear it will never stop listening. I know they bound your mouth, but they will never bind your will. I know you were given, not chosen, but I choose you still, even if the stars deny us, even if the throne shatters beneath our feet." And the court gasped, but the bride's heart dared to beat louder. He stepped forward again, and this time he knelt before her, not as a servant, but as an equal, not as a savior, but as a soul seeking hers. And in his hand he held a vow, not printed, not programmed, not pressed into him by law, but carved in his own blood, etched into a sliver of earth stone, and it read, "I vow to hear you, I vow to shield you, I vow to learn the sound of your silence, until it sings." And when he placed it in her hands, the veil quivered, and for the first time, it burned not her lips, but its own threads, unraveling with the hiss of broken ancient rules. And the priests of the ceremony stepped back in fear, for never had the veil undone itself, never had a bride's silence rejected the wedding, and the moment it fell, a single sound escaped her throat, rough and small but real, and the high council moved to stop it, and the guards reached for their weapons. But the human rose and stood before her, and said, "If she cannot speak freely, then this wedding is not union, it is conquest. And I did not come to conquer." The chamber erupted into fury as the elders roared the ancient laws, and the warriors unsheathed blades forged in sunfire, and the scribes scribbled with frantic hands, but the human did not falter, and the bride stepped forward barefoot across the obsidian floor, each step shedding centuries of silent obedience. And the air grew thick with judgment and threat, but her voice cracked again, and this time it shaped a word, and that word was mine, and it echoed like thunder through the halls of power. Mine as in her voice, her body, her right to decide and choose and love and live. And the guards trembled as if the word itself were a blade, and the human beside her smiled, not with victory, but with awe. And he took her hand, not to lead her away, but to stand with her, and the court watched as the universe changed in one breathless heartbeat, where silence once ruled. And now a voice rose. They tried to force her back, tried to remake the veil, but the threads turned to ash in their hands, and the human declared before the court that no law stood higher than choice, no tradition holier than truth, and the high speaker laughed cold and cruel, and demanded combat, trial by flame, and judgment of the old ways, and the bride stepped forward before the human could, and said with newfound strength, "No, he will not fight for me, because I will fight for myself." And her voice cracked. The stained glass ceiling of the hall and the stars seemed to lean in closer as if bearing witness, and from the fire pits of the ceremony ring she drew forth the sword of the first bride, a relic untouched since silence became law, and she raised it to the crowd not in threat, but in promise. And the people watched as she did not kneel, did not tremble, did not wait for permission, but stood free. They did not crown her with gold, nor wrap her in chains of tradition. They let her speak, and the human stood beside her, no longer an outsider, but the first guest in a new order. And when they wed, it was not beneath the old laws, but in the open field, where wind had no rules and sky no master, and her vows were her own, and his were etched into both their palms, and they kissed, not to seal a deal, but to seal a bond. And in every world that once silenced its daughters, a tremor began, a whisper of rebellion that would one day roar. And as for her, she became not just the bride who spoke, but the mother of 1,000 voices, and every vow spoken after hers remembered the moment when a human gave her back her name and her will and her fire. And when asked what his name was in the stories told across galaxies, she always said his name was the one who listened. The tale spread not as propaganda nor as rebellion, but as truth, and truth has a way of slipping through systems of silence until even the most distant moons heard of the bride who broke her chains, and the human who offered not rescue but respect. And though some courts burned their records and erased the event from their archives, the people remembered, and memory is stronger than law. For in backwater colonies and crystalline cities, brides began to speak, not all at once, not loudly, but one voice at a time, until the silence that had ruled for generations crumbled like old stone beneath a growing tide, and children born under the new sky asked their mothers what it meant to have been silent, and the mothers said it means we waited until we couldn't anymore. The bride and her human husband built no palace. They lived among artists and outcasts who needed no permission to exist, and from that home came scrolls and songs and archives of sound from voices that had never been heard before. And the bride often sat by the flame, recording stories in every tongue she had once only listened to, and when asked what she remembered most, she always said, "The moment I spoke my first word, I wasn't alone." And the human never left her side, not to speak for her, but to walk beside her as she forged a language of her own. And when the stars turned and their bodies aged, and the galaxy grew louder with living voices, she looked up at the constellations that had once watched her wedding and whispered the last vow she ever needed to say. "I was silent, but I am not now." And the stars echoed back, "We heard you. We always will."